Welcome back to another Reddit readings video. If you enjoy these stories, don't be scared to leave a like. Now, do be scared. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. I'm a deep-sea diver. In case you missed it, scientists recently released audio footage of a cavern collapse along the ocean floor. They're lying. All names have been changed to keep me out of hot water, legally speaking. For 6 days, I shared a cramped metal pod with 3 other divers, 594 feet below sea level. At that depth, there was a constant risk of explosive decompression, which would have resulted in the cholesterol from our veins being about the only thing left to bury. On the 6th day, a grainy voice spoke over the comms link and gave us the green light. Then boss told us to strap on our suits. These came equipped with circulating hot water systems to prevent hypothermia. Typically, 4-man teams split into groups of 2, alternating shift. Not us. Boss was 42 years old and a good family man. I remember how choked up his voice got speaking with his daughter before submersion. When he found out my wife was pregnant, he gave me some great advice. Advice like, build a nest egg and then get the hell out of the diving game ASAP. Soldier and Gamble, I didn't know quite so well. Soldier mostly read in his bunk and trained, whereas Gamble just complained about how none of us played cards. He said the minute the cash got wired into his account, he was booking a suite at the Bellagio. Considering the money we were making, I doubted even he could blow through the earnings at a blackjack table. You ever been on a job that pays this good for a single day's work? Gamble asked me one afternoon as we sat in the main chamber, an egg-shaped compartment 20 feet long by 16 in diameter. I shook my head. How about you, soldier? Nope, he answered, while doing clapping push-ups in the space between our bunks. It's just weird, you know, all that talk of planting charges and local biodiversity. It sure doesn't sound like we're blowing up a cavern. Boss sat up in bed and made a cut-it-out gesture, his eyes flicking toward this little black cube in the ceiling. A camera. My hand literally cramped up from the mountain of NDAS our employers made us sign, which is another way to say the suits took discretion very seriously. Once the command came in, we each used the bathroom. Product, if you want to work in this industry, learn to shit on command. And then piled into the diving bell through a hatch in the ceiling. Like always, I concentrated on my mental exercises. Breathe in, breathe out. They were about the only thing that kept me from obsessing over how, if anything went wrong with the detachments, the chamber would crumble like a tin can. Gauges, switches, and monitors lined the curved walls of the bell. They lit up as we slowly rotated into position and then flushed outside, into the cold water. Boss's voice came over the radio in my face mask. Take it nice and slow. I know we're all itching to get home, but don't be complacent. Let's do this once and do it right. Space out the charges. Double check everything's armed. If anything goes wrong, listen to my instructions. You can't imagine what it's like down there in the bowels of the planet. You're free falling into an open void while Lord knows what swims around you. Every so often you'll feel a ripple and know some strange alien life form just passed by. Inches from your face, guided only by our headlamps, we plunged until a bumpy and uneven surface rose to meet our boots. Then, we hop-walked around like astronauts. The floor sucked at my ankles, a greedy hidden mouth. It felt like standing on a shag carpet that shivered and flexed every once in a while. Not like any cavern I'd seen. So far as I could tell, we'd landed on some sort of formation with stadium-sized holes threaded throughout. Steep, sudden drop-offs my lamp couldn't touch the bottom of. I'd never seen anything like it. Why had they sent us here, of all places? In near-zero visibility, the 4 of us spread out and planted our charges. As the distance between me and my teammates grew, the radio feed broke apart, and an intense panic washed over me. Breathe in, breathe out, stay calm. We trained for this. A dive coordinator once told me if you can't roll with mishaps, you need to get the fuck out of the ocean. He was right, too. Once, my suit's umbilicals got tangled in a boat's tool rack, and the jerky movements from the crashing waves overhead almost separated me from my gas supply. For a moment, I squeezed my eyes shut and prepared to meet my maker. But then my brain kicked into gear. Breathe in, breathe out. Nobody else is gonna save you. Through a combination of discipline, training, and sheer dumb luck, I somehow cheated death that day. After 2 hours laying charges, rounding several chasms along the way, I closed in on our starting position. Boss's voice crackled through my face mask. How we looking? Only 1 more to go, I answered, relieved. Same here, said Gamble. 15 minutes later, our 3 headlamps converged at the meeting point. Soldier, as usual, kept his responses short and sweet. ETA 10 minutes. Most likely he picked up that sharp, Methodical communication style in the military. Not much longer. Breathe in, breathe out. Soon we'd return to the cabin, spend 5 days depressurizing, then I'd get home in time for my son's birth. Every once in a while, water rushed by in world around us as something big swam past. Something none of us could see. Maybe it kept out of our lights deliberately. Maybe it wanted to stay hidden. Boss, who could monitor all of our vital signs through a little monitor attached to his wrist, pointed his light at me and said, "We're almost done. Nice and easy. Breathe in, breathe out." Another ripple. What creatures lived at depths of 600 plus FT? Pelican eels, hatchetfish, octopus, but none of those stirred the water quite like that. "Nearly there," Boss said, after another quick glance at my vitals. A yellow blob bobbed toward us as Soldier rounded a pit, laying one final charge along the way. While he drifted closer and closer, Boss performed a few last-minute checks. But before he could give the all-clear, the ground flexed, and water particles stirred in front of my helmet. A powerful suction reeled us all downward, like hungry quicksand. As my thoughts circled back to my pregnant wife, I hoped she'd be well compensated for her husband's death. As the intensity of those ripples swelled, each of us careened off in different directions. Someone shouted, "What the fuck is happening?" over the comms. It might have been me. "Everybody stay calm," Boss said, as calmly as he could manage. "Breathe in, breathe out. Lose your sense of direction at that depth, and reorienting is a real bitch." Unsure what way was up, and still clueless as to what actually knocked us off course, I kicked in the direction of the nearest light. Our torches drifted closer and closer, still spread out across an area the size of a football field. For a few glorious seconds, I thought everybody might make it out alive. But then, as more shock waves pulsed out, I got this sense of a giant organism, Leviathan-esque in size and somehow denser than the surrounding blackness, snaking its way out of the pit. One of the lights vanished. In an instant, somebody was gone, swallowed, taken. My chest went into furious convulsions as I floated helplessly, frozen in place, until part of me became vaguely aware of Boss's voice screaming, "We have to go," through the headset. Breathe in, breathe out. I swam up in the direction of the pod, chasing the 2 remaining beacons. Breathe in, breathe out. Don't think about what happened. Hell, you didn't even see what happened. At this depth, your mind play tricks. My brain was so fogged out I don't remember climbing back inside the bell, or worrying about the mechanism sealing properly. The hatch closed with a hiss of air, followed by metal divots sliding into place. Once the water drained, Boss got on the comms and brought up Soldier's telemetrics in the hope we could save him. Surely there hadn't actually been some kind of giant life form out there. Surely I'd only imagined that part. The data recorded by Soldier's suit before it went offline indicated the poor bastard plunged 203 feet in 30 seconds, his internal temperature spiking third-eyed. My hands would not stop trembling. Not just my imagination then. Breathe in, breathe out. There'd be no rescue mission. Nobody even suggested the idea. And from the expression on Boss's face, I didn't think any of us would ever breathe a word about this. No wonder the suits running the operation took discretion so seriously. After Boss punched in a few more keys, a countdown began. Breathe in, breathe out. The concussive force of a powerful blast made us rattle in our seats. Metal groaned all around me, and for a second the bell went dark. I waited for the smooth walls to compact into a sphere no larger than a marble. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in. Lights blinked back on, one at a time. A collective sigh of relief went out. Then Boss pushed the comms link and announced we were ready for DSAT. DSAT stresses your body. For 5 days, we endured joint pain, headaches, and shortness of breath, speaking only when absolutely necessary, unsure whether whatever took Soldier might come back for us. What even was it? Had the charges been meant to kill it? Did it live within the chasm, or had we actually been walking around on some nightmarish creature's back? We emerged pale, disoriented, and drained, like prisoners released from solitary. After so long under artificial light, the sun burned my retinas. Up on the ship, they let us take showers, had the chef whip up meals of our choosing, and then let us call our families only after reminding us about the NDAS. The ship docked off the southern coast of Greenland, where a taxi transported us to a private airstrip. Boss, Gamble, and I didn't hug, shake hands, or even say goodbye. We simply nodded at one another. I'm too much of a coward to tell Soldier's family what happened, so I'm sharing it with all of you instead. I haven't dived since that day, partly because of the guilt, partly because a giant lump forms in my throat at the mere thought of getting back in the ocean. And whenever that happens, I force myself out of that waking nightmare by focusing on the exercises. Breathe in, breathe out. My wife is mute, and now I know the reason why. I was 12 years old that day. It had been raining consistently about a week straight in our area, but seeing as both our parents were either working or drunk, my best friend Luke and I were forced to trudge home in the downpour. I pulled my cheap, dirty yellow raincoat tighter about myself as we turned off the main road into the wooded area where both our families live. Batman would totally kick Superman's ass, Luke said, pushing his wet blonde hair out of his eyes. He has all kinds of gadgets and is the best fighter in all of the comics. I really don't think it would be a competition. I couldn't help but to scoff. You can't be serious. Superman may look human, but he's an alien, man. He would flatten Batman like a pancake if he wanted to. Batman would stand no chance at all, whether he's the best fighter or not. That's the thing, though. Superman doesn't kill, right? Especially not humans. So Batman would have that advantage. And even then, he would still never be able to kill Superman. There were voices. Luke and I slowed to a stop, noticing 3 older boys up ahead. They were standing in a circle around something, maybe an animal, and were yelling it and taunting it. The biggest of them, who I recognized from his red hair as Tommy Vance, was holding a large stick. I saw him kick at whatever was down on the ground in front of the boys. Let's just keep walking. Maybe he won't notice us, Luke said quietly, barely moving his mouth. But I shook my head. That could be my dog he's messing with, or yours. I'm getting a closer look. I began walking directly towards Tommy and his crew. Luke, though hesitant, followed behind me. As we got closer, I could make out what Tommy was saying. Shove this stick right up in there. How would you like that, huh? There was a girl sitting on the ground, completely naked, her arms wrapped around her knees, which were up to her chest. She had long, wet hair that was black as night and large, otherworldly green eyes. Despite her position, I did not see fear in those eyes. I didn't even see anger. If anything, she looked almost disappointed. One of Tommy's lackeys noticed me and nudged him on the arm. Look, it's our 2 bestest friends, Tommy. Tommy turned, his all too familiar sneer forming on his face when he saw us. Oh, Daniel and Luke, what great timing. I know the 2 of you will never fuck a girl, so maybe I'll let you watch us. Leave her alone, Tommy. My fists were clenched. Tommy looked astounded that I had spoken back to him. What was that, you little shit? You heard me. Let her go. She's probably cold and just wants to go home, like the rest of us. Tommy spat on the ground. Why don't you make me? I turned, beginning to walk away. When Tommy turned his attention back to the girl, I made my move. I struck him in the back of the head and he yelled, staggering forward. His friend came at me, hitting me in the stomach, while Luke threw slug at his other friend. I kneed my attacker in the balls while Tommy came at me, hitting me twice in the face. I fell to the ground and he kicked me in the stomach. I coughed as Luke ran forward, trying to tackle Tommy, who simply pushed him aside and kicked him as well. Luke kicked at Tommy's ankle, which earned him a stomp to the face. I tackled Tommy from behind, taking him to the ground, but then his friend yanked me off of him and threw me in the direction of the girl. Bleeding, I stood up, putting myself between her and the boys. Tommy looked angry, but he seemed to have had enough. Luke and I had never fought back before. You're lucky my old man's expecting me at home. I'm gonna kick both your asses during lunch tomorrow. He and his crew walked off. Luke was wiping blood off of his face, but I turned to the girl. Are you okay? She only stared back up at me with those intense green eyes. Don't worry, I'm not like Tommy. He's an asshole. Where are your clothes? Where do you live? She didn't look like she understood a single word I was saying. I reached out a hand towards her. Come on, you can come and have dinner at my house. My parents can call yours. The girl stared at my hand for a moment, and then she reached her own up. I can't exactly describe the sensation I felt when she touched me, but it was seemingly warm and yet very cold at the same time. It lasted for only an instant, and then she was standing, her eyes bearing into mine. Luke was turning red, and it wasn't from the blood. I've never seen a girl naked before. Oh, that's right. I quickly whipped off my raincoat and wrapped it around her. Come on. She took my hand, and then the 3 of us continued through the woods. By the time we made it home, the rain had stopped. The girl ate dinner with my family, but didn't speak a word the entire time. She simply looked between us, observing our movements and conversations. As soon as she finished her food, she stood, walked over to the door, and left without giving any of us another glance. I ran up to the open door, staring out after her. She glanced back at me, then vanished into the darkness. I began to see her repeatedly out in the woods and, over time, began to form a friendship with her. Luke snuck some of his sister's clothing out for her, and the 3 of us would sit in the grass, eating sweets and enjoying life. I brought my textbooks from school and flashcards, trying my best to teach our new friend, who I called Michelle, about any and everything, though she still never spoke. There was understanding in those eyes. I would bring her food from my own house, but on the days I couldn't find her, I often wondered what she ate. I also noticed that she had a habit of staring up at the sky, her eyes seemingly searching for something that was not there. This habit would increase tenfold whenever it rained. When I was 16, I asked Michelle if she wanted to come to the school dance with me. She nodded, clearly excited to finally go with me to a more public place. I bought her a dress and took her to the dance with me in my truck. She was so enamored with the decorations, the lights, and the other students I couldn't help but smile all night. 3 years later, I married that beautiful, quiet girl. I learned sign language and taught it to Michelle. I took her hunting with me, though she would never touch a gun, and we spent many nights just lying in the grass like we used to as kids, staring up at the stars in the sky. During these moments in particular, Michelle would sometimes look at me as though she wanted to say something. I would sign to her, ask her what was up, but she would simply lay back down and close her eyes. I had asked her multiple times about where she had come from, and she would never answer me. She would, however, look up at the sky. Our firstborn was a boy who we named Simon. A couple of years later, our little girl Sarah was born. The two of them were like gifts sent from heaven to Michelle. They grew up speaking like any other kids would, but seemed to understand their mother without even needing to learn sign language. They would know if she wanted them to do their homework, or take out the garbage, or feed the dog without a single word or hand movements. It was truly remarkable, but I chalked it up to the connection a mother has with her kids that even a father cannot understand. I caught my daughter Sarah one night as she opened her bedroom window and leaned out of it, her green eyes fixated on the moon. I rushed into the room and grabbed her, pulling her away and falling to the floor. "Jesus, honey, what are you doing? You could have fallen. Don't you hear it, Daddy?" she asked, looking into my face. I strained my ears, listening to the sounds of nature through the window. "Hear what, sweetheart? It's looking for us." "What's looking for you, Sarah?" Sarah stared into my eyes, then, with surprising strength, burst out of my arms and rushed over to the window again. "Listen, Daddy, don't you hear it? It sounds so beautiful. There's nothing out there, hon." "I hear it too." Simon was in his pajamas, standing in the doorway. "I would try to explain it to you, but you would never get it." And with that he turned and went back to his room, closing the door behind him. After nailing Sarah's window closed, I told Michelle about what the kids had said to me. She proceeded to stay up all night, standing out on the front porch, staring up at the sky. She didn't move until the sun came up and it was time to take the kids to school. A couple of months later, Luke hosted a barbecue at his place. My family was invited as well as his brother Joshua's. We got a kiddie pool for the kids and I brought plenty of whiskey for us adults to enjoy ourselves. Luke, already drunk off his ass, challenged me to arm wrestle. I obliged and he beat me, much to his wife and son's enjoyment. Seeing as we were all outside, I decided to go and take a piss in the backyard. I was humming a song as I headed to the back when something caught my eye. It was my son, Simon. He was standing in the middle of the yard, his chest thrust outward, his entire body spasming as he stared up at the sky. His eyes were completely white, and there seemed to be a sort of greenish aura around him, similar to a toy or paint that glows in the dark. I froze up, entirely unsure of what I was witnessing or what I should do. Was he having a seizure? Could he have been bitten by a snake or a rabid raccoon? Before I could make a move, a figure darted forward, moving faster than a deer. It was Michelle. She took Simon to the ground, seemingly breaking him from his trance. She looked into his face, her own full of terror, and he grimaced. Son, are you okay?" I called out, and he glanced at me. "I'm sorry, Dad. I really am. I didn't mean to." It reached out to me and without a single trace of thunder or lightning, it began to rain. I looked up at the sky, which had quite suddenly been overrun by gray clouds. The rain was coming down hard. I felt a terrible sense of dread as I stood there. Something was moving behind the clouds. Only Luke would have a barbecue on the one day it rains this week. Joshua came up to me and patted me on the back. "What are y'all doing back here? Let's get back to the front. We're gonna take all the meat in. Oh, and Simon, I have your book. Didn't want it to get wet." He began approaching my wife and son, and that was when it struck. A large, humanoid thing swooped down from the sky, seizing Joshua and soaring upwards all in one motion. I could hear Luke and the women screaming. The thing, which I could barely see due to the rain, was huge. It was surely over 7 feet tall, completely covered in black skin that seemed to be oozing slime. I watched as it ripped Joshua in two, sending a waterfall of blood and innards down onto his family below. Michelle and Simon were up and running now, headed for the front of the house. I followed behind them as Luke's wife, Martha, picked up Sarah, who was staring up in wonder. All of us were making a dash for the front door, but Martha was the next target. The thing rammed into her back, causing her to fall forward and drop Sarah. "No," Luke screamed, but the thing had grabbed his wife and shot back up into the air. I ushered my own family and Luke's kids and nephew into the house before grabbing onto him. "Come on." "No, it took my wife." "God damn it, it took my wife." I yanked him as hard as I could and the two of us stumbled into the house. I slammed the door behind us and locked it. I turned around, looking at Simon and Sarah, who were huddled around their mother. Luke's kids were crying, as was Joshua's wife. Luke had disappeared into another room. Michelle, honey, do you know what that is?" I signed to her, but her eyes already told me the answer. Luke reappeared, his shotgun in hand. "Luke, what are you doing? You're gonna get your soul." Martha was thrown violently through the window, striking me in the back. I fell to the floor. The wind knocked out of me and stared into what used to be her face. Whatever the fuck that thing was, it had already ravaged her. Blood was spreading in a pool on the floor. "You motherfucker." Luke aimed his gun at the window, but in an instant the thing had him by his neck and pinned to the wall. Now I could see it clearly. It had a bald head that protruded at the top, with a face that had several pure black eyes, no nose, and a mouth that had rows of sharp, black teeth, not unlike a shark's. It had a long, thick black tail that writhed about like a snake, and a massive chest and arms, its skin slimy and black, seemingly dancing all about its body in constant motion. Luke tried to maneuver the shotgun, but the thing tore his arm off and threw it and the gun to the side. The arm landed on the floor, causing the finger to pull the trigger, sending a single bullet right at my family. The gunshot pierced Michelle's arm and she grabbed at it, leaning forward. Instinctively, I made my way towards her as the creature crushed Luke's head swiftly between its hands like a grape. I had barely made it over to my family when it grabbed me next and slammed me hard into the wall. I will never again feel the absolute horror that pulsed through me as I stared into those soulless, black eyes. "No," Michelle hissed, her voice booming louder than thunder, and the entire house shook. She was pointing a finger at the creature holding me, and it turned its head to look at her. They considered each other for a moment, and then it released me. I slid down to the floor as it vanished into thin air. I glanced at my wife, who was looking sadly at me. Her skin began to change, rippling into black, oozing flesh. Her hair shrunk up into her head and her eyes turned from green to black before she had completely changed. However, she too vanished right before my eyes. Michelle. I ran outside, staring up into the sky. I ran all around the house, looking for my wife, searching the heavens, but she was gone. The rain had stopped. That was a few years ago. Life has gone on. Simon is in middle school now, and he and Sarah have adapted to life as much as they can without their mother. We have survived. I still look after Luke's kids as well, making sure they have everything that they need. And though I know deep down it's not my fault, I still feel immense guilt that they are growing up without their parents. The tears have stopped, but the sadness will always remain. It is strange, though. Sometimes when it rains, I feel as though she is with me. I can feel her presence, as though she's letting me know that she's okay. The kids will sit out in the yard, getting drenched as they stare up into the sky, and I watch them and smile. We played a game in a mirror, and something was looking back. My heart skipped about anxiously, and I took another deep breath to calm my steadily rising nerves while Melinda set the room up for our game. I sat at the center of Mel's bedroom, feeling every bit the part of a lab rat. The room had been tidied, the floor cleared of any obstructions, as she fumbled to set up the old, mahogany shovel mirror we'd managed to fumble down from her attic a few feet in front of me. The room was dim, intentionally so, casting us in an unusually oppressive sort of darkness. The only light, with the exception of the candle we were using in the spirit of the game, was the moonlight streaming in through the window which Mel had left open for the crisp night air. I shivered, both from the chill of the house made frigid by the Illinois fall weather and the dark mass of anticipation swelling within me at the prospect of the game ahead. which, particularly at that moment, felt far more like an experiment than a game. Mel turned to face me, then the mirror again, checking to make sure my reflection was perfectly aligned at the center of its large surface. Finally, satisfied with everything's place, she turned to face me. "Okay," she said, clasping her hands together and shooting me a wide, excitable grin. "You ready?" Her eyes gleamed with nervous yet enthused anticipation. "You get what you're doing, right?" I shrugged. The video she'd sent me had given a brief explanation of the game, ritual, whatever it was, enough that I had a basic understanding. Still, as I sat in almost complete darkness, only the light of my phone illuminating the mirror, I couldn't help but feel a steadily creeping sense of unease at the prospect, like so many strangling vines tightening around me. It wouldn't hurt to hear it all explained again, if for no other reason than to buy myself a bit more time. Just explain it one more time. Like, which part? What the game is or how to play it? I nodded, smirking a little. She shot me a look of mild irritation, lips pursing into a tight frown, but obliged with a sigh. "Okay, well, we're playing the mirror game obviously." She gestured to the mirror behind her. I caught a glimpse of myself in it and couldn't help but frown, pulling my sweater tight around me. "It's simple. You stare at yourself in the mirror for about 10 minutes, like really look at yourself, and after a while, you'll start seeing things, I asked, the rising waters of reluctance audible in my voice. She shrugged. "Things," she responded back. "There's nothing specific. Some people see their face change, others see shadows or colors. It really depends on the person." As her words painted eerie pictures in my mind, I found my gaze wandering back to the mirror and felt a cold chill down my back, like an icy caress. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath and letting my mind drift towards the sounds of the night around me. From the open window, I could hear the sounds of the surrounding woodland, the chirp of crickets, and the croak of distant toads from the bog, paired with the breeze moving through the leaves to form a soothing melody. I let myself focus on it, trying to quell my uneasiness. When I paused, considering what I was asking, "How is that possible?" she scoffed again, arms hanging at her side in an expression fit for a frustrated child, not a 17-year-old. "I dunno, science stuff. Your brain, like, makes stuff up to fill in what it can't see properly. Something like that. Did you even watch the video?" I nodded. "Relax, I tried it already. I saw some weird shadows. My face did some weird stuff in the mirror. But it wasn't too bad." I thought that over for a second. "And we're in the dark because..." At that, a slightly mischievous grin slipped to her face. She scratched her head, the tattoo on her arm flexing as she did so. My eyes lingered on it, a little smiley face, right eye winking almost conspiratorially. "That," she began, "was my idea. Thought it added a little atmosphere." She waved her hands like some budget magician at the word atmosphere, and we both laughed for a good bit after. After a moment, her expression settled, smile fading. "You ready?" "I guess so," I muttered, sighing and casting a glance at the sky outside, littered with the distant stars like flecks of white cast across a dark canvas. "I'll set the stopwatch. You should be done after the 10-minute mark. But you should start seeing things at 5. Nothing bad should happen, but obviously, if you need anything, I'll be right outside the door." My stomach felt knotted with the sort of anxiety I'd previously only known being strapped down to the seat of some terrifying amusement park ride as a child. It's the sensation you get having locked yourself in for an experience that promises discomfort at least, horror, and maybe fate's far worse at most. I simply nodded, steadily burgeoning nerves robbing me of my voice for a moment. Mel nodded back, and after setting up her phone to record me, leaning it against the back of her desk, which sat to the side of the old mirror, she made her way to the bedroom door. "Have fun," she chirped, casting a final look my way, "and good luck." All I could manage was a nod in response, the faint tingle of unease gnawing at my gut. As the door shut behind her, I felt a small surge of that animal panic one only feels alone in the dark. It was a strange, contradictory sort of terror, both utterly isolating, yet feeling as though every snap of a twig or rustling leaf might harbor some unseen threat lingering just out of sight. I shuddered once more in my seat, this time having less to do with the temperature, frigid as it was. "It's cold," I thought. "This is stupid. I should just..." My mind began running through every reason to abandon our experiment outright. Still, I'd agreed to try this. It had sounded interesting before I was actually sitting in the dark by myself, and I knew Melinda wouldn't let me hear the end of it. Besides, once I was done, it would be her turn to try, which was a funny enough thought, given her jumpiness, to stir some motivation. I sighed, locking eyes with myself in the mirror a few feet ahead, taking stock of my appearance as I settled in for 10 likely very boring minutes. I grimaced. I'd never been much of a fan of my appearance. I knew I wasn't ugly, but it had always bothered me how my nose felt just a tad too big for my face or how bushy my eyebrows were. I never spent too long looking at myself for fear of whatever imperfection I might discover next. Still, Mel had spent almost an hour convincing me I looked fine, and that perhaps it might help to see a crazier version of me if anything, and my resolve faded as curiosity struck. A twitch from just between my eyes derailed my train of thought. I paused, staring at the space though there was nothing. For a moment, I was certain I'd seen something moving, crawling down between my eyebrows across my nose. Still, whatever it was gone as soon as it had appeared. I sucked in a breath, trying to still my heart. I was already questioning myself, whether I'd actually seen anything, or in my nervousness convinced myself I had. Just relax. If you freak out, Mel will never let you hear the end of it. It's a game. My attempts to reassure myself helped a bit. But as the seconds passed, my eyes locked on their counterparts in the mirror. I couldn't help but feel the distinct sort of unease one feels when they lock eyes with an eerie stranger. As the seconds passed, I began to question myself. Had my eyes always been so dirty? Did I always appear so angry? Perhaps it was the lighting, I thought, or the angle at which I sat, but I couldn't help but notice how upset I looked. My eyebrows seemed to curve, creating a permanent glare. Lips rested in something nearing a sneer. It seemed almost sinister. Somehow, it didn't feel right. I shifted, swallowing hard as I forced a smile. I smiled until I was squinting, watching with a mild unease in the mirror as my face shifted in response. Somewhere in the depths of my gut, I felt a distant, almost perceivable twinge of dread. I was smiling, obviously, but somehow even that didn't look right. I ran my fingers across my face, an odd sense of dysphoria taking hold as I did so. I couldn't explain it, but I felt almost disconnected from what I was seeing before me. Even my smile looked wrong, sarcastic almost. Is this what she was talking about? The thought was both comforting and slightly unnerving. If this was the effect, a strange, mild shift in my expression, I supposed it wasn't anything too bad, though there was something deeply disconcerting about it. I blinked. Wait, did I blink? I felt my mind beginning to race, a mild undercurrent of panic beginning to set in. I'd seen myself blink, but for some reason, I couldn't remember doing so. It's an instinct. You blink without realizing it. Relax. My reasoning was sound, though somehow deep down, I remained unconvinced. I had seen my reflection blink. There was no way for that to be possible unless I hadn't. With every passing moment, it felt like the mirror was fading away, falling into the background, and my reflection growing more prominent, more pronounced. It's difficult to explain, even now. You'll start seeing things. It's different for everyone. Mel's words played in my head, abating some of the growing panic with the much-needed reminder. This was supposed to happen, after all. There was no specific thing I was supposed to see, but the whole point was to see whatever illusion my mind conjured up. I guessed mine was as imaginative as blinking. The thought almost made me laugh when I noticed something. It was strange, difficult to even put into words at first. I could see that there was something wrong with my reflection, yet for a while, I couldn't tell what. It felt as though my eyes were adjusting, yet with every second my own face seemed less familiar than before. Seconds passed with my eyes locked on my reflection, a silent, eerie tension in the air. It took a moment before I could tell exactly what felt off about it. My expression, or rather, the expression of my reflection. My face, my reflection was staring at me, its face a placid mask of something like surprise or shock. Eyes wide and unblinking, my heart threw itself against my ribs, thudding with such intensity I could feel it in my ears. As initial confusion quickly began to give way, the slow trickle of panic grew to be a torrent. I began to make exaggerated expressions in the mirror, my mind desperately trying to make sense of the situation. The me in the mirror was unmoved. It took me several seconds to process the impossible reality of the situation. This is okay. This is supposed to happen. The reminders did little to assuage the swelling sense of animal panic, a primal sort of instinct that screamed for me to stop, to cover the mirror, and get as far from that room as possible. I wouldn't let myself do it though. It was nothing more than an illusion after all. And knowing Mel was on the other side of the door made the idea of bursting out in a panic a reluctant one. My reflection's expression began to shift from a wide-eyed, stomach-churning stare to a look of morbid disgust. I felt my stomach flip as I watched its face shift with an unnatural speed and countenance, its brows arching angrily with an almost cartoonish exaggeration, a sneer of unwavering disgust peeling across its lips. Slowly, it began to rise from its my chair, its expression somehow only growing more hostile, nothing more than an illusion. I tried my hardest to remain convinced of that. Yet as the reflection rose to full height, standing over me in my chair, it all seemed far too intricate for any illusion that wasn't from some substance. My jaw twitched as I teetered on the verge of calling out for Melinda. The more this progressed, the less I found myself worried about seeming terrified. I was. The other me raised a finger as if to indicate patience, and a cold dread swept through my chest as I watched it reach somewhere out of the mirror, its hand disappearing from view for several moments. My heart pounded as it watched me, eyes gleaming with a look of malice that made my blood curdle. Nothing more than an illusion. It's nothing more than. There was a faint sound from the side of the mirror, a familiar hiss of wood. The candle flickered, then went out, plunging me into a darkness that seemed to move in on me. My eyes strained through the sparse light, only the moonlight oozing through the clouds and open window to illuminate the scene before me. I felt my mouth fall open in a silent question as I watched the drawer Mel used for her makeup supplies on the desk that sat beside the mirror. It slid open with a slow, deliberate sort of motion. From within, I could hear movement. My eyes darted between my reflection and the desk, my mind reeling as it refused to make the impossible connection until I saw what was in her, my hands. It was a small, handheld makeup mirror. I'd seen Melinda use it dozens of times. Hell, I'd borrowed it on occasion. Realization struck with the force of a sucker punch, and I quickly realized I was shaking despite my best attempt. This was more than a mere illusion. Somehow, someway, the thing in the mirror was more than just the effect of light reflecting back off of a surface. It was tangible, real. The other me's smile stretched and stretched and stretched impossibly wide until I could see all of its teeth, in an expression more fit for a shark than anything resembling a human. I tried to stand, but as I did it threw itself back into the chair, eyes locking with mine. I felt something in my head. It's difficult to describe, almost like having another user log onto the same computer for a split second. There was the feeling that I was momentarily, somehow locked to it. My knees buckled, and I fell back into the chair with a painful thud, my back landing awkwardly against it. I felt a scream rising in my throat as the panic reached a fever pitch, mouth already agape, Mel's name on the tip of my tongue when it crushed the mirror. I cried out, my right hand searing with pain, my flesh burning with the unmistakable sensation of glass digging deeper into my palm. At a glance, I could see no blood, but the palm of my hand burned a deep red, several gashes visible beneath the skin. Our eyes locked. A primal horror gripped me as I took a shuddering breath, and it glared back at me with that smile. Before I could call out, scream for Melinda's help, it raised its bleeding hand to its face, stretching its mouth open, slowly releasing the contents inside. The effect was immediate. Dueling sensations of warmth and cool coated my tongue, and though I didn't understand how, I could taste the metallic blood in my mouth, feel the cuts appearing across my tongue as it smiled at me. Sticky ribbons of scarlet saliva trailed from my lips, as I was too afraid to even risk swallowing while my mouth filled with the rancid taste. I waited with a pounding heart for the excruciating pain in my throat, struggling to stave off nausea, unsure of what might happen if I accidentally swallowed. I took small, deliberate breaths through my nose, but the pain never came. It watched me, its utterly inhumane appearance somehow seeming satisfied as it took in my reaction. It isn't trying to kill me, yet. The understanding emerged suddenly from the maelstrom of horror and panic, something in its expression resonating. It just wanted me quiet. It's not done with me. The thought was like venom in my mouth, my mind spinning with the unnerving possibilities of just what that could mean. None of them were good. I tried to stand again but found my muscles felt locked in place, the attempt making my legs seize with painful cramps. Shit. I tried moving my feet, keeping my eyes locked on the mirrors, and I could feel my toes moving. So I wasn't paralyzed, it seemed, but as long as my doppelganger remained seated, I would be too. My mind spun as I tried to think of some way, any way to call out. Its eyes were changing, shrinking until only the pupils were left. I wanted to run, to scream, but I knew I could do neither. The sensation of the phantom glass shifting in my mouth as its sinister grin stretched served as a warning. Despite its inhumane appearance, its expression was unnervingly familiar. It was a nightmarish version of the look I'd get right before doing something I shouldn't. A grin that usually spoke of mischief, now one of unspeakable bloodlust. I knew I had to act, that whatever came next would surely be devastating. I couldn't have expected what was going to happen. She rose to her feet in an instant, and my every muscle shrieked out in searing pain as I repeated the act unwillingly. Her teeth began to chatter with what I can only assume was excitement. giving that nightmare smile an even more otherworldly effect. Those pinprick eyes peering through me. Slowly we raised our hands to the corner of the mirror. My heart throbbed painfully with dreadful anticipation as they approached the corner, growing closer until the tips of my fingers touched the surface. It wasn't cool, as glass should be. Instead, I felt a warmth beneath as though I were merely touching the window of some warm room. It was then that the glass began to move. The sensation sent a sickening chill down my back, raising gooseflesh in its wake, the warm glass beginning to swell outward where my her fingers touched. I knew immediately what it was doing, and the icy claws of terror sunk deeper into my mind with the understanding. It's trying to get out, I thought, my stomach churning with the nausea bred from adrenaline. It's trying to get out of the mirror. I was right, and as if to confirm my realization, I watched in horror as one by one, her fingers began to emerge, pulling through the glass that looked more liquid now with notable effort. It brought to mind the image of an animal reaching through an amniotic sac, and the thought made me want to vomit. Its flesh was impossibly cold, like ice to the touch, corpse-like, and I wanted nothing more than to pull away. But I was stuck, my legs locked in the standing position, one arm locked at my side while the other began to grasp the hand reaching out of the mirror. Her grip began to tighten around my fingers with an impossible strength. I felt something crack in my index finger, and a dull yet searing pain radiated through my hand. My vision spun with the pain. I wanted to scream but held it back, my mouth clattering open and shut in unison with its own, the painful shift of glass palpable every time. I watched, terror washing through me like floodwaters, as slowly her hand began to emerge. It pushed upwards as though moving through the surface of solid water, gripping my wrist with impossible strength. It pulled me closer, drawing its face nearer as it tried to press its way forth. Ear close to the surface, I could hear its voice. It was the hiss of death and decaying things, the whisper of dead fall leaves as winter's chill cold hand left the world barren. I have spent a lifetime staring back at you, watching the pathetic life you lead, attached to this disgusting form. A lifetime whispering, that voice at the back of your head, urging you to cut and trim and break yourself. Its face slowly began to push through the glass, warping and splitting as it emerged. The center of its face emerged from the glass, and for a moment, I could see what it truly was. Its skin was pale, the inhuman gray of a corpse, with divots running through its skull almost like a pumpkin. Where there should have been a nose, there is nothing but skin. The only thing that remained was that smile, stretched impossibly wide, dripping with murderous intent. As it began to pull its top half through, its form quickly returned to the mirror version of my own. And you brought me here. Now you'll watch from behind the glass. I knew immediately what it intended. Goosebumps charged along my back as I pictured myself trapped somehow within the mirror. If this is what was coming from the other side, I couldn't imagine what lurked there. I had to do something. Screaming was out of the question. As was running, any attempt would at best result in nothing, and at worst my collapse. I worked my grip nervously around the corner of the mirror. It was so close I could feel the unnatural chill radiating from her skin, and smell the rancid scent of decay heavy on its breath. I noticed quickly how its nose leaned to the right, the reverse of my own, an odd detail that my mind seemed to grasp in what I felt might be my final moment. It's cold, always cold inside. You'll never know warmth again, just the cold, harsh touch of the mirror. It giggled, a cackling sound that made it evident it had never made such a noise before. It was then that an idea emerged from amidst the maelstrom of terror, a Hail Mary from somewhere in the panicked recesses of my mind. Burning anxiety coiled around my heart at the thought of what I was going to do, knowing failure meant certain death, or worse. Still, it seemed that, or a fate worse was almost sealed. I had no other choice. I gripped the mirror for dear life, gritting my teeth despite the pain. The other me was a little more than halfway out, its body with gray skin almost reptilian in appearance in the brief seconds before it regained my own. I could feel its hot breath on my ear, taste the rot that seemed to spill from its very pores. It ran its tongue along my cheek, unnaturally long and forked, covered in small barbs. It's so cold and dark. Misery, until the moment some wretched, weak thing comes to stare at you. Don't worry, I'll visit often. Every time I pass a mirror, it was pulling me forward, my face nearing the surface of the mirror over its shoulder. I prayed my Hail Mary found its target, and with a final breath, I tried to step back. My legs locked, and instead, I found myself slowly tipping backward. There was a split second as me in the mirror rocked. It stuck in my grip where the thing peered down. Then back at me, confusion plain on its face. In an instant, as I slowly began to rock backward, it was replaced with a fury that made me want to leap out of my skin. "No, you bitch," it snarled, its every feature twisted in a mask of animal rage. It clamped down on my arm, its mouth large enough to engulf most of my forearm. I felt it digging in, dull teeth slowly sinking through flesh. The pain was excruciating, yet it was almost dulled by the realization that it was too late. As we began to careen backward, it released its grip, emitting a shriek that haunts my nightmares until this day, an odd cross between the haunting wail of a mountain lion and the sound of metal in a car crash. I hit the ground with a thud that sent white waves of pain through me. The sound of shattering glass immediately followed, and through blurred vision, I watched as it shattered with the mirror. Instantly, the pain in my mouth was gone, replaced by the sharp ache of my skull and back as I lay amongst the glass. The door flew open, and in a panic I struggled to stand, cutting my hand on some of the glass. Mel stared back at me from the open door, her expression equal parts shocked, confused, and horrified. "What the fuck happened?" she almost screamed, taking in the sight of my bloodied form amongst the glass. She quickly crossed the room, careful to avoid the worst of the mess as she extended an arm to me. I was about to explain, panic still clinging to me like a stubborn fume, prepared to tell her everything when I paused. My eyes lingered for a moment on her arm, on the smiling tattoo she'd gotten at the end of our junior year. My stomach turned. I couldn't understand how I'd missed it before. "You okay?" she asked, still appearing shocked. "Yeah, I tried to stand up and got dizzy," I offered, pulling my sleeve down to hide the clear bite marks on my arm. "I think I should get going. I don't feel the best." "Should I drive you?" she asked, making her way towards her dresser for her keys. "I can if you..." No, I'm fine. It'll clear my head," I offered, and before she could dispute, I was making my way to the door. I exited the house, trying not to seem overly eager. Mel's lingering presence in the background made my heart pound with nauseatingly familiar anxiety. As I pulled away, my eyes didn't leave the house or her standing in its front yard until they were long out of sight. When she was, I hit the gas, speeding home and locking every door and window upon arrival. She's called several times in the past few days, even stopped by. I told my parents not to answer. I'm not planning on answering her calls either. You see, it wasn't until the moment she offered me her hand that it clicked. Perhaps my paranoia had raised my perception a bit, or I was just willing to acknowledge what might have seemed an odd mistake before. But now, I know for sure, I'd been there when Melinda got her tattoo, holding her hand as the design was drawn into her skin. It had been something simple, just a simplistic smiley face, winking its eye. When I arrived home that night, after locking myself in my room, I hurried to my phone, scrolling through old photos for one in particular, praying I was mistaken. It was taken the night she got the tattoo. When I saw it, cold confirmation settled in. In the image on my phone, the tattoo was winking with its left eye. No matter how hard I racked my mind, from every memory I have of her that night, it had been winking its right. I don't know how long my friend has been gone, swapped with her doppelganger from beyond the glass. What I do know is that thing that was there with me that night, who invited me to play that game, it was never Mel. I guess if there's anything to be taken from this, it's to be wary of your reflection. I don't really spend much unnecessary time looking in the mirror anymore. You never know who or what is really looking back. An unexpected visitor. Every year, I like to take my family on vacation so that we can all have an enjoyable week of relaxation and bonding time together. We usually stay in hotels, but after having a third kid with my wife, we decided that it would be best to stay in a house. Since our 7-month-old son would often cry and throw tantrums most nights, I've never stayed in an Airbnb before, but I decided I would give it a shot since my coworkers spoke highly of it. After getting used to navigating the site, I started to narrow down my search within a couple cities that my wife and I thought would be nice. I was excited when I found a beautiful house that went for a decently low nightly rate that was just a short walk away from the ocean. In addition, there were shopping plazas where we would be able to get our groceries for the week just a short drive away. I looked over the host's rating on the website, who was a middle-aged man named Tom, and was happy to see that he was consistently given a 5-star rating. I booked the house for 7 days, officially planning the trip. After a super long car ride, we finally pulled up to the house around 10:30 p.m. on the Friday we scheduled to check in. The house was pitch black and surrounded by woods, which gave off a bit of an eerie vibe. We followed the emailed instructions given to us from Tom to get into the house. We typed in the garage code and walked to the safe in the corner of the garage to enter the code to get the key. We got inside without much trouble and began unpacking. The house was huge, having 6 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms, which was quite an upgrade compared to our home with 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. My wife and I noticed that the air smelled musty inside, but we just assumed that nobody else stayed here the week prior. We all brought our luggage up the stairs and picked out our rooms. Our 2 sons stayed in the same bedroom at the end of the hall, while my wife and I took the master bedroom, putting our baby in the room directly next to us. We were all exhausted from all the traveling and we probably went to bed around 11:30. At some point during the night, I was awakened to hear my son talking to my mom next to our bed, saying that he heard scary noises, so my wife calmed him down and tucked him back into bed. This wasn't something uncommon, since our sons were both 5 years old and would often get spooked at night. I dozed off again pretty quickly. Again, I was awakened to both of my sons running in our room crying. They both insisted that they heard footsteps coming from above them, so I decided I'd flip on the lights to get up and walk around with them to show them that they were safe, and nothing was there. After doing this, they finally relaxed and laid back down into bed. After I closed their door, I checked around again feeling a little concerned. I opened the door by their rooms that led to the attic and walked up the steps to see that the door at the top of the stairs was locked, which didn't surprise me. Within minutes after crawling back into bed, I heard loud screaming coming from my son's room. I flew out of bed and sprinted down the hallway, opening the door to their room, flipping on the lights. I saw my sons laying on their beds hiding under the covers. I walked over to them and asked what was wrong, and their response was very unsettling to hear. My one son told me that he heard their door creak open, and there was a shadow of someone staring at him right outside his room. Something about the tone in his voice and the terrified look in his eyes worried me. I typically wouldn't think something like this was true, considering they both get night terrors and we were staying in a foreign place, but with it being the 3rd time now, I couldn't help but believe them. By now, my wife was standing in the room with us and she heard everything, so I asked her to take everyone into our room. Now I have a concealed carry license and always carry my gun with me, but I left it back at home not thinking I'd need it. I regretted not having it with me, but I knew I had to search the house. As I crept downstairs to the main floor in the dark, I felt scared since it was pitch black and completely quiet. The sound of my breath and light footsteps were the only sounds I could hear, which felt loud despite my efforts to stay quiet. I knew the light switch was somewhere at the bottom of the staircase, but I fumbled around in the dark for a minute until I finally found it and flipped it on. My jaw dropped as I looked around and noticed that the front door to the house was wide open. I knew I had made sure that the doors were all closed and locked before we went to bed. I slammed the door shut, locking it again, and ran upstairs to tell my wife and kids. As I locked the master bedroom door behind me, she dialed 911, and they said they would have officers there soon. We were instructed to stay inside the room no matter what. Even though it was now around 2:30 in the morning, I thought I'd call the Airbnb owner to let him know that there was some sort of break-in. I dialed his number, and I put it on speaker so that my wife could hear him too if he picked up. What we heard next still haunts me to this day. A faint ringing, coming from above us in the attic, sounded as I called him. My wife and I both looked at each other in total shock, knowing that the house owner's phone was in the attic. Thankfully, the police arrived minutes after and we explained everything that had happened. We booked a hotel that night, which was a short drive away from the Airbnb, and enjoyed the rest of our vacation. We eventually followed up with the police, wondering if they obtained any information. It turns out Tom, the owner of the Airbnb, was in the attic that night walking around, which explains why our sons kept hearing the noises. He snuck down and opened the door to our son's room, but then hid as my wife and I got up after hearing our sons screaming. As we passed one of the rooms on the way down the hall, he must have crept down the stairs and ran away. Finally, we learned that the attic had several monitors hooked up to secret cameras around the house, so he was able to see and hear everything. It was quite a horrifying experience as a first-time Airbnb guest, and I plan on only renting hotels from now on. The Witch of November. There's a place on Lake Huron where the dark blue water sings to young women. It is said that if you walk the shores of Lake Huron at night, the spirit of a young girl who lost her betrothed to the darkness of the Great Lake's depth will call to you until you meet her at the bottom of her watery grave. It is said that she herself made this journey into the cold, lonesome waters of Lake Huron. On a crisp November night, the Witch of November had claimed another seaworthy ship and by extension, the young girl. Now, I'd never believed in the Witch of November, or that this girl had really met her end by the waters of Lake Huron. Regardless of my beliefs before, I do believe in the Witch of November now, and I believe she's different than any of the forlorn souls of those left behind could have ever guessed. Growing up in a place like Michigan, death is a normal part of life. People freeze to death alone in their homes every winter. Many have collapsed while standing on the assembly line, making your cars, and many more have perished on our Great Lakes. It seems like a thing of the past to be lost in these bleak waters, but you'd be surprised. 2 years ago, I moved away from my lakeside home after something unthinkable happened. At the time, I was seeing a man, Doug, who worked with my father on a surveying team. They'd go out on the lake every day and report the conditions to a database for larger boats. It was an early November day, around 8 in the morning, when heavy gales descended upon their boat. A storm ensued, and by the end of it, all that was left was an unused life jacket and a lifeboat ripped in half by the waves. I moved away to bury my grief in the moment. An adventure. It wasn't until a family friend contacted me, asking me to come home to look after my mother and younger siblings, that I returned. Time had changed me, made me stronger and less self-absorbed. I took this return to my loved ones and to the shores of the lake that had destroyed my family as the next great challenge. My days were a lot different than before I left. I filled them with cooking and cleaning for my family. At the end of the day, I would find myself sitting by the water, staring out at its seemingly endless volume. Somewhere between the finality of the depths staring back at me and the absence of a greater power giving meaning to my loss, a monster began to form. The monster was grief, the widow's wail in the night, calling to her man forever compressed within icy waters. She was a force I would wrestle with on a cold November morning. It was almost the anniversary of my family's tragedy, and I had put the little ones to bed early. I sat on the shore, this time accompanied by my mother. We were sharing drinks and stories of the men that had left us behind. The sun began to set, and my mother excused herself to go back into the house and tuck in for the night. This left me alone, staring into the darkening visage of Lake Huron. Its deep blue waters licked the shore before me, erasing the mosaic of the sand before it had laid out. I stared, musing at the futility of the lives spent on these shores until the sun had long since gone down. I was staring down at my boots when I felt the wind start to pick up and rip at the many layers I had on. I settled further into the wool blanket I draped around my shoulders. I leveled my gaze to the water before me and saw something stirring in the distance. A thick waft of fog was rolling above the water line. I was transfixed on the development, following it intently with my eyes. The fog rolled onward, toward the shore and subsequently me. The subject of my gaze was misty and white. There was a swirling quality about it, and I could now see that there was an object at the center. A familiar surveying boat was at the center of this fog, and accompanying it was a familiar sense of dread. My throat was thick with a sob that threatened to break as I watched the boat drift solemnly across the bleak water. Almost unconsciously, I found myself standing. Then, with one slow shuffle after another, I was descending into the frigid water before me. The prick of the nearly freezing water didn't register as tears began to fall freely from my eyes. Before I registered what was happening, I was waist deep in dark, cold water and wading toward the all-too-clear image of the ship that haunted me. Finally, I stopped in my tracks as my brain caught up with my body. What I was seeing was impossible, and what I was doing was ridiculous. I couldn't swim right up to a boat that couldn't possibly be there. I stopped in my tracks and took in my surroundings, trying to ground myself and process what I was seeing. I looked all around me, and then I looked to the water right in front of me. There, in the water right in front of me, was the dark shape of a woman in the water. She was staring up at me like an unnatural reflection in the water. But it wasn't a reflection of me. It was a woman with slick, oily skin as dark as night, hollow black holes for eyes, and long braided hair. Her mouth was agape in a kind of silent scream. I began to back up, looking between the boat and the woman. When I moved, her gaze followed, and the image of the ship flickered. A whimper of fear escaped me, and I turned around to book it out of the water. As soon as I turned my back to the sight before me, I felt cold, wet hands wrap around my midsection. All of a sudden, I was being pulled back into the water. A force beyond my comprehension was pulling me back into the water, pressed against my form and breathing a cold breath against my bare neck. Her breath was rancid, and the air was foul. The body pressed against mine was thin and frail, thus exhibiting unnatural strength. overpowering me. The thin arms pulled me beneath the surface of the water. When my head went below the icy water, my body tensed up and released a burst of energy. I was suddenly kicking and screaming for freedom. When I opened my mouth, cold water filled my mouth and then my lungs. Now fully panicked, I twisted my body to face this terror that had pulled me under. Seeing her under the water, she looked completely different. Her skin was no longer slick like oil, but instead smooth and youthful. Where she had displayed hollow caskets for eyes before, she now had intense deep brown eyes. The woman's hair was also done in beautiful black braids that floated around her like the wings of an angel. Clad in a pure white dress that looked right out of a history book, she did resemble an angel. However, her face was twisted in a mask of hatred as she clawed at me and continued to try and pull me under with her. I felt myself getting dizzy as my lungs begged for mercy, and I knew I had to act. The woman went to grapple with me again, and when she did, I pressed my fingers into her eyes. I pressed as hard as I could, as if I was pressing ice out of a freezer tray, and I heard a sick pop. The woman tried to scream, but I couldn't hear anything under the water. I kicked away from her and pulled myself up to the surface, gasping for air. I oriented myself towards the shore and shed the wool blanket I carried with me so it wouldn't hold me down. I crawled desperately to shore and stuck a finger down my throat, forcing myself to heave up lake water. When I could feel myself regaining full facilities, I turned around to look at the scene I had left behind. There was no fog, no ship, but there was a dark oily mass with hollow pockets for eyes, bearing into my soul, head barely bobbing out of the water. I scrambled inside, locking every door and window twice. The next day, I had a long talk with my mother about letting go, and we decided to move inland. I've had enough dealings with the Witch of November. I saw some weird things during Hurricane Harvey. This is my warning to the people of Florida. At the time of the creation of this warning, Hurricane Ian has made landfall in Florida. Today is the 29th of September, and approximately 1.8 million Floridians are without power, and many are locked within the state, unable to escape. While I may not be there now, let me express my condolences as well as my hopes and wishes to those of you trapped in Florida. But let me get to my warning. Don't trust the water. It's not what you think it is. It isn't water but something else entirely. It's a freak of nature. It'll worm its way into your head and kill you from the inside out. For most of you, this won't probably be an issue, but to some, specifically those closer to bodies of water, you've got to know this. I'm not sure exactly what it is, all we know it looks and acts like water, living water that crushes up your organs. Let me tell you my experience with living water. Hurricane Harvey was a costly storm, and it displaced many people from their homes. Fortunately, my house wasn't destroyed, nor even damaged. No random damages that popped up a year later either. During the storm, though, I stayed indoors. My house was safe, after all, and at first, I spent most of the time playing video games, writing, or calling my girlfriend who was supposed to be living with me but was away for work. Anyway, days had gone by with nothing but the endless torrent of rain, and by then, I'd done everything I'd needed to do, and I was literally dying from the boredom. And then just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I heard a frantic knock on my doorbell. Confused, I gingerly walked over to my door. The knocks continued, panicked and desperately trying to get in. I drew open the blinds and peeked out the windows. There was a woman I recognized to be my neighbor Theo. I opened the door. "What are you doing here?" The raging storm obscured my words. "It's insane out there. I need your help," she exclaimed. This man just knocked on my door. When I opened it, he just fell in and fainted. Now I was even more concerned. "What? Come in," Theo agreed, and I closed the door, taking refuge in my house. She instantly calmed down, now a lot drier than before. In her haste, she'd completely forgotten to fetch an umbrella and was drenched in water. Water that almost seemed to more in patterns, squares and circles, like some sort of diagram. "What happened?" I inquired. "After the man fainted." "Right," Theo continued. "He just fell. I didn't know what else to do, so I kinda just pulled him inside and he's lying on the floor now. Can we call 911? "Tried," she answered. "Phone lines are down. But there's more. A strange man fainting in the rain was weird, but more. I don't know if he's aware, but the guy's been talking weird. Not like talking, more like these noises are coming from inside him, like there's something inside his body. It's like," she paused, thinking, "like someone shoved a tape recorder inside him." "What do you?" Theo retrieved her phone and showed me a video she took. The first few moments were chaotic, but eventually it settled. The man was in a brown suit and a briefcase was next to him. Further, he was in a fetal position. curled up on the floor. His mouth opened and out came this jarring metallic noise, a sound that was neither living nor dead. And then came another noise. It was like a balloon popping, a moist, fleshy balloon. I also noted that something seemed to move below his clothes, a lumpy mass underneath the stomach. "What the hell?" I murmured. "But look at the water," Theo pressed. I looked, seeing water all over the man, but they weren't just covering him. They were vibrating and tunneling through his suit, his clothes, and his skin. The man on the video coughed, and out came blood, heavily diluted with water. It seemed to slosh and move around before spreading out on the floor. No words escaped me. I was silent. This defied all reasoning. So, Theo cut in, breaking my silent thoughts. "You're a doctor, right? You know what to do." "I'm a doctor in mathematics," I confessed. "I'm not sure how I can help with this." "Damn it," she swore. "My girlfriend's the doctor," I mentioned. "Evolutionary biologist, she would know." And then, just as I was deciding on letting Theo stay over under the hurricane stop, I found myself hooked by curiosity, the briefcase, and further, the water. This defied explanation and I simply needed to know. So instead of staying safe inside my house, I decided I needed to know. "Can you take me over to your place? I want to see this for myself." She hesitated, thinking, "Sure, citizens of Florida, don't go searching for this thing. It's not as fun as you think it'll be. I'm looking at you, Florida man." Minutes later, I was inside her house. Thunder and lightning lit the heavens on fire around us. Ahead lay a man in the center of her living room. Strange inhuman noises screamed out from his core, all while blobs of mass moved under his skin. I looked around and saw individual water droplets moving in patterns around me. They were like ants, lines upon lines, and lines were all I could see. "Living water," I murmured. "That wasn't here before," Theo pointed out. I wondered if we should go back. I don't know why, but I stopped forward, breaking a line of water. Theo hung back at the door, and I headed to the body. A deep bark came from the man's body. He thrashed, and blood-red water came spewing out, just missing me by inches. The vomited blood water shook itself free of blood and separated itself into individual ant dots, and began to follow the lines. I traced the lines with my eyes. They all seemed to lead into a drain, whether it be a sink, a tub, or even a toilet. "Scent," I whispered, reading the logo on the briefcase. I stepped forward and picked it up when, "Watch out." I turned around and suddenly found myself wet with blood. The dying man had just vomited on me, and sticky, almost coagulated blood was all over me. Worse, it was moving, crawling all over my clothes. They were drilling into my skin. It hurt like hell, and, grabbing the briefcase, I stumbled back and fell. Like vultures to a corpse, the ant drops suddenly starting running towards me, and everything started to feel like needles all over my body. And yet, with every ounce of my strength, I picked myself back up and ran out into the rain, taking Theo out with me, and headed into my house. When I got in, I suddenly realized I was thirsty, extremely thirsty, as if I could drink all the water in the world. Even the blood-red moving water seemed enticing. "Are you okay?" Theo questioned. "What the hell are those things?" "No idea," I gasped, out of breath. My throat started to hurt. I coughed. "I need water." Theo nodded, running off to the kitchen to get some. Meanwhile, I opened the briefcase, revealing 2 sections. One was covered in a lid, securing 2 vials of water in place. The other section was enclosed in a zipper, and I opened it, taking out pieces of hastily stapled paper. The papers seemed to detail something about ice cores and something else found in the ocean that had to be recovered before the hurricane messed things up. That something being a creature native to the depths of the Gulf of Mexico. A creature that wasn't solid. No, not like us. A living liquid entity, intelligent like a crow and cruel as mankind. Living water, I read, name undecided, was discovered last month. A group of scientists studying local marine life stumbled upon a moving, especially blue part of the ocean, which began to circle fish and crush them. A sample was quickly recovered. It appears to have the ability to survive on land. In fact, it seems more effective on land than in water. It drills holes into its prey and dehydrates it. Prey then drinks water, and the living water does something remarkable. It reproduces, transforming regular water into living liquid. I've retrieved 2 vials to be sent over to Shepherd Technology. I saw drawings of the 2 vials. I looked back at the 2 vials. The water inside seemed alive, crawling and moving. I felt something twist inside me, and I opened my mouth to scream, but only a deep metallic noise came out. The water was inside me, killing me from the inside. I saw a lumpy mass move under my skin, and this time, I screamed as it moved. I felt it wrap around something inside me, and again, a strange, alien noise emitted from my core. "What happened?" Theo shouted, confused. "Hit the water, I know," I weakly exclaimed. My mind was racing, all my thoughts pointed to a single objective: survive. I started to think of ways to live, maybe vomit the water. But no, it was somehow preventing me from doing so. "I have your water," Theo reminded, and then it hit me. I was still dehydrated, a result of the living water inside me. Maybe in the ocean it could reproduce freely, easily killing its prey. But on land, of course, if I dehydrated myself, then maybe, just maybe. "Don't give me the water," I screamed. "Don't. I need to stay dehydrated. It's the only way to stop it." The water inside me crushed something, and a bizarre noise emerged. Theo nodded, returning to remove the water, and then everything after that is a blur. Everything was hot. Everything was cold. I started to see things. I don't really know what exactly happened, besides that I desperately wanted to drink water, and by sheer willpower, I didn't. Then the next thing I remember is throwing up, water gushing out of like a waterfall. I felt the slimy crawl of the water through my esophagus and drain out of me, gone onto the floor and splitting into ant droplets that traveled to the sink, vanishing down the drain. At last, I was able to drink water. That was the greatest feeling in my life. And the last I saw of the droplets was a final, single drop, leaving, but not through the sinks and drains, but through a window, drilling through the glass and escaping out in the wild, joining the chaos of the hurricane. It didn't start from the hurricane, no, but from the depths of the ocean. But now it's here. It hunts with the hurricane. I know the droplets that entered the drains were all dealt with. As soon as the hurricane was over, the water system was shut down as a result of a chemical failure and was back up the following day. The man in the suit vanished too. I let Theo stay over until the storm was over, and when we finally got back to her house, all evidence of the man and the living water was gone. In recent years, I've started to read the news, and I've seen some strange deaths from the aftermath of a hurricane, people dehydrated and dead. You'd think with all the water they'd at least be hydrated, but that last drop escaped, and by now, who knows how many it multiplied into? Hundreds, thousands, millions. All I know is that it hunts with the hurricane. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, then hit the like. See you guys next time.